On today's episode, I'm talking to Rich Webster, who's a designer that is doing $500,000 a year as a designer by only working 15 hours a week. When I first heard this, I was like, this doesn't sound like a possible thing, so I need to check out this guy. And this conversation was so fun. I actually learned some things myself through, and I think it's really a great conversation. You're gonna learn a lot, so enjoy this conversation with Rich Webster. Rich, what's up? Good to have you on the show. Thank you for
Thank you
doing
for
this.
having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, man. Listen, I'm wondering where to get started. I'll share this. When back in my old office, I had this kind of like thing pasted on my back, which said "work hard and be nice to people." And then I go into your Twitter, which is where I found you, and I see that it says "work less," and I'm like, how is that possible?
And be nice to people.
Yeah, work less and be nice to people. I mean, okay, this guy seems like he's also knows what he's doing, and I wonder if we have different approaches or philosophies to work and life in general. And I'm just curious to hear your story and then talk about work philosophy and just like dive into it. So I would love to hear the story of your design agency. How did that came to be? And yeah, how'd you get started in that?
Sure. So my story is I graduated from college around, I think I finished in 2012.
Studying design and stuff?
Ironically, no. So I did
Okay.
not take the traditional route. I actually studied marketing, which
Okay.
ironically, I mean, I always talk about like, it was like a $200,000 college degree. And it, it was not very useful, honestly. At that time in 2012, I know like colleges have gotten better at this, but in the States, they were really not teaching me any of the skills that I needed to be an entrepreneur and to run my own business. They taught me skills that were very good to become an employee, but not to be a business owner. So I felt like I had just like huge gaps in my skill set that I didn't even know existed, right? Like, how do you, get on a call and do, talk sales? How do you, I didn't know anything about design, copywriting. Like there are just so many skills that are required now to run an online business or just to run a business in general that I didn't pick up. So if I wanted to work in finance or consulting or any of the big firms, I would have been perfectly set up for that. But as a business owner, I graduated and was kind of like, what do I do now? So I finished up school and I was pretty clear at that point. I had done an internship maybe in my sophomore or junior year. And I was pretty clear that the last thing I wanted to do was to have a regular job. It just did not speak to me. I was not really interested in it. I, did the 9 to 5 office thing, and I was doing this job like straight out of Office Space. Like, it was like data entry where I was like calling up, I was calling up these like state Medicaid boards to gather data to put into it was literally like the spreadsheet job.
Sounds
And
fun.
it was terrible. But it told me right away that I did not want to be an employee. So when I graduated, I didn't really have much in mind, and I was kind of just like flying by the seat of my pants. And in hindsight, I think it's really easy to look back and tidy everything up and say, oh, well, then this happened and then this happened and this happened and now I'm here. But I will really say that like for the first 5 years that I was in business, I honestly had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And the main objective from probably 2012 to like 2016 was like just say yes to stuff, figure out how to make money, decide what I like to do. And there was not much structure around it. And this is coming from someone who like, I always say I never really intended to be a designer or to get into the design industry, but I kind of fell backwards into it. I had this guy that I was kind of friends with, and he runs a great design agency in Washington, D.C. They're called District Design Group. And I was just spending a lot of time over at his house. And at a certain point, I was just like looking over his shoulder and I was like, hey, can you show me how to do that? And I literally just got to the point where like I would harass this dude and be like, let me pull up InDesign, show me how to do that. What's that keyboard shortcut? How do I move things around?
Wait, what
And
was
even though
he
I didn't have,
designing? What kind of design work was he doing?
yeah. So it was graphic design and web design. Those were kind of his two
Yeah,
main things. So it was doing a lot of print publications, obviously, because InDesign. And then they were doing sites as well. And his wife is a developer. So it's like it's the dream team. And what I found, which was funny about, learning design as someone with no art skill, no intent to go to design school. I mean, so often you hear people and they're like, I always knew I wanted to be an artist. And I've always been super creative and all this stuff. Like that was not me at all. If you were like, Rich, I need you to draw, a house on a piece of paper, I could give you a stick figure, and that's about it. So I never really fancied myself an artist. But what I realized was like I was really good at replicating other designs, and then I could like pick up the frameworks behind it and start to understand like why they made these decisions that they did. So I really come at design from a much more kind of analytical framework than most, which is like, they have this creative brain and like, they understand
By the
color and
way, this is
composition and things like that.
as I teach people how to design, and this is actually a very good framework to begin with. Replicate other people's work. You will, by doing this, figure out. That's why you see people in museums copy the great artists. I mean, that's people do this to learn. So this is actually a great way to get started.
I mean, I found it insanely helpful. And I think, when I talk to people who are beginners, it's my number one tip, honestly. I'm like, go find a piece of world-class design, pull up a blank canvas, and just keep moving stuff around until it looks exactly the same. And just by getting into the muscle memory of like, okay, this line of type is this big, this subline is this big, you start to get a feel like, oh, there's proportion, there's hierarchy here. And I kind of picked up all of this without any formal education, just by like copying this dude, being like, hey, can you look at my design and tell me why it's bad? And it was kind of just like a natural process that happened over the years.
So how did you honestly get into somebody to pay you to do that? What was that?
How did I get into it? Okay. So,
who was the first one actually willing to pay you to do that?
He was nice and he let me do some subcontract work. But it's funny.
Oh, your friend.
The first year
so
that
your friend was the lead.
Yeah, my friend. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. The first year that I was in business, and I always say this because when, I share like, my kind of revenue numbers on social media, people are like, well, I just can't even imagine getting there because it's so high, right? Like in 2022, I did like over $500,000. But the first year I was in business, I made $10,672, which if you were in the United States, I would have made more money working at McDonald's or like Walmart or any minimum wage job, right? So like I was not all-star world's best designer, business genius by any means when I first started out. So yeah, that was like the early part of my journey, which honestly, I don't talk about that much online because I don't know. I think there's a lot of people that have like great takes and experience on how to get from like 0 to 1. But most people tend to come to me to get from like 1 to 10 or 10 to 100.
Yeah. But I think,
feel like I
think it's really important.
There.
I actually think it's really important to dwell on this because I think now what's going viral on social media is exactly I don't know if it's even the second step or third or 10th to 100 step that is scaling and leveraging that, which we'll get into because this is really awesome. But people miss out on the skill building, grungy beginning of, hustling. And that's, that cannot be skipped, right? You cannot start from step 10 to, without going through 1 to 10, right?
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I think that is the one piece that people miss out on. And I can give all of my frameworks, how I think about business, how I deal with clients and sales and systems and all this stuff. But like the prerequisite, and I really sometimes feel like maybe I don't mention this enough, is like, yeah, the one prerequisite is you have to be good. And there is no substitute for time when it comes to getting good. Like you can pay for experience, you can pay for acceleration, but there is a tax, and it is the getting good tax. And it is something that I still work on. There's always like 1 or 2 new things that I'm trying to up level on, even 10 years into this now, as I'm sure you are as well. But the things that we work on switch, right? In the beginning, it was how can I make design that clients don't look at and they're like, what is this? And now it's like, okay, how can I run a business better? Things like that.
Yeah, for sure. So what are some of the things that help you level up from the cringy design into, oh, I actually can get really good clients to work with me? What were some of the things that help you on that?
Okay, so I think in terms of like hard skills, there's just a certain level of taste and execution and speed that you need to get to as a designer. And the skills that I stacked to get to where I was now was first, like I mentioned, I really started honestly just playing the copy game, where every day, I would wake up, I would pull up something that was good, that like someone, whether it was an award-winning site or just some design that I thought was awesome. And then I pull up a blank canvas and would say, how can I get from point A to point Z? And would just sit there and try to make it work until I got there. And that was really the visual design chops that I first started with. Back in, what was it, 2013, 2014, there was no you the way that there is now. I think if I was doing it now, I probably would have just pulled up YouTube and, took a couple of courses and things like that. But, it was slim pickings back in the day, and you really did have to do more networking and talk to experienced people. But once I got like the design skills under wraps, I think the next big skill set that I picked up was actually I stacked on animation on top of that. And for my business, that was a really big unlock. And it kind of got us to the point where I am now, which is, my agency is kind of a full service agency. So we don't just do one specific niche thing, right? When clients hire us, I'm pretty much available for anything creative. There's really no limit on the scope for the most part. So when I was able to take what I learned as a designer and then start stacking animation on top of that, that was kind of like blowing the lid off the roof. So when you can pick up that like second complementary skill, there's really no substitute for it. So if you're a designer and you can pick up development, right, that's a perfect example of it. Or you're an editor and you pick up animation, same idea, right? You stack that on top. Or you might pick up like a business soft skill and add that to the mix. So maybe you spend some time figuring out how to do sales, right? Or you add copywriting. I think there's just like a handful of skills right now, and just rattle off the top of my head, that I really like in for a stack. Design, development, editing, I think is really important. Copywriting, sales, public speaking. If that would be my list, if you're like, how do I up level next? I think those will not go out of style. They probably won't be, don't quote me on this, they won't be replaced by AI. And it's just like a good investment,
Dude, I love that you said that. I think I don't know if you can sort through the first video on my channel, which is I think 2016. The first video on this channel is called The Full Stack Designer Manifesto. And this is exactly what I'm saying there. It's like word for word. It's like stack your skills, design, development. I didn't say animation, I said video. But yeah, copywriting, when you can solve your clients all of these things together, there's like immense value to be unlocked. Yeah, I love that we share that. So I'm intrigued in hearing on, so you've started off kind of like getting leads from your friend. Were you always kind of like a one person? When did you start delegating? If so, how? Like, how did that happen?
So I always benefited from, and I don't think it's an accident that I ended up in this situation, but benefited from my network and knowing people and collaborating with people. So over the years, I have done collaborative projects with a bunch of people. Especially, I found like collaborations with people with complementary skills that I don't have are really important. So, I have a longtime business partner that I have worked with clients on for a really long time, and his skill set is completely different. So he's a PR person, right?
Okay.
So he understands how to
By the
get
way,
clients booked on
like, what is
television.
when you're saying your network, what is
Mhm.
your network? For example, I had my network from high school. I had my network from design school. I have I've been in the military, so I have a network. Like, what are your circles? What kind of a network worked for you?
Yeah, so I kind of cobbled together this network, honestly, just from work experience and being in the scene in Washington, D.C. So I started my business in D.C. and I got to know people just through like, I did some like freelance work at a radio station and I met people there. Like it was honestly all really random and serendipitous, and there wasn't like particularly a strategy
Got
around
it.
it. But it was kind of all over the place. And at that time, I don't live in DC anymore. I live in Philadelphia. It's a small world. So, you start getting to know people, and this is just so different than how people know me now. So most people know me from social media. And the great irony of that is I built my entire business prior to being on social media for the last 2 years. So my first social media post was, I'm coming up on the 2-year anniversary of it. So my agency doesn't have a social media page. I never got a client from it. It was all kind of like the old school networking and referral playbook, which I think, so often people say, just post your portfolio on Instagram and clients will find you. And I never did that.
I had the exact
Yeah.
same experience. I mean, I had like my one person business caped at 300K before I kind of moved into education. But at that point, I already had a YouTube channel, which I was doing just for fun as a creative outlet, like this channel. And people on the channel assumed that YouTube is what brings me the client. Although all of my clients, I'm based in Tel Aviv, Israel. So all of my clients were local. Like none of them even knew that I had a YouTube channel. So it's very similar. I think your local network of where you are is so underrated, and social media is so overrated. I think social media is good for reach, but it's low trust in terms of people when you meet them in person. It's or get a referral, right? It's so much higher trust.
I mean, the one thing I'll say, and I had this conversation with Jamie Brindle, you might know, he's got a pretty big IG page, and we were talking about this, and I was like, so like, have you ever gotten leads for your agency through your social media? And he was like, not really, but the one thing that does happen is people will be like, I've seen you on Instagram. Like I've seen your face on my phone before, and that builds trust. But what's crazy for me is like, I've got 250,000 Instagram followers. I've got an email list with like 17K people on it. And none of that translates into clients at all because it's not targeted for that, right? The people that I'm talking to online are not the people who are my ideal client. And I'll get into like what my ideal client is. But people have this misconception that like, oh, if you just have a large number, people will just pay you money. And it couldn't be any more true. I mean, I thought that when I started on social media, I was like, well, listen, once I have 100,000 followers, like money just happens. And it's not that at all. You have to be targeted and talking about something.
All right. So I was asking about delegation. Like at what point did you start delegating? Okay.
So let me run the story here. So, 2012, whatever, graduated, probably up until 2016. I was just figuring out how to get good. I was stacking skills. Honestly, like if I looked back on that period, any of the ways that I think about business now were not even on my radar at all. Like there was just nothing in my brain about business. I was just like showing up to survive and do stuff and say yes. Like the way I think about all this stuff,
hustling is the word that you're looking
exactly. for. Exactly. So 2016 to 2019 was kind of where I dialed in. And I was like probably 6-figure freelancer / mini agency. But what I found at that point was I made a common mistake that I see happen over and over again, where people get to a certain point in their creative business, and this isn't just creatives, whether you're a coach or consultant or whatever, any solopreneur, where you become maxed out on two things. You're maxed out on time and you're maxed out on money. And you feel like you've hit the ceiling.
What do you mean maxed out on money? I understand maxed out on time. What do you mean by maxed out on money?
Okay, so they are really two sides of the same coin, because once you're maxed out on time, there's no more time left in the day. There's really no good way to figure out how to make more money because all of your time is spent on fulfillment and just doing the work for your current clients. So, everyone has an upper limit. If your time is maxed out,
you're basically maxed out your money.
At whatever rate you're currently charging, there's a cap there.
Yeah.
And unless you can kind of take a step back, which I'll talk about, and restructure how you do things and give yourself some breathing room, you're not going to be able to figure out how to get more money. Because at a certain point, the way that we solve that problem is more hours, and everyone has only 168 hours in the week. And you cannot fix that equation by trying to jam more hours and by not sleeping. Like it just doesn't work. So for me, I ended up building myself kind of this like business prison where I was effectively like the only employee of my own business. And I was not a great boss. I kind of built myself this job, and I hit this like weird inflection point. And ironically, it was kind of precipitated on, I was on vacation, and I take a long deserved vacation after a while. And I don't know about you, but sometimes like if I can just get out of the day to day of running the business and give myself a few days to think, like all of a sudden, all the things that I'm doing that like are really not rational or don't make too much sense come into clarity. And I was sitting on this beach, and I picked up the book 4 Hour Work Week, which I had never read before. And, I devoured this thing, and it like blew my mind open. And if you haven't read it, highly recommend it. It's a 10 out of 10. Really, really enjoy it.
I have not read that, but
sure
I've read others by Tim Ferriss. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's really good. And that was kind of like just when I look back, sitting on that beach, reading that book, and just getting some of the lessons that like the way that I've been operating, I don't have to operate that way, really, really shifted everything. And I spent the next 3 years, maybe a little bit more, figuring out how to design myself out of my business. So the story that I told myself was like, okay.
So up until that point, you did not delegate anything?
Zero. No delegation. One man show. Every once in a while, I would partner with someone, but it would be more of like this 50% is yours for your work, and this 50% is mine. So it was really more like a joint venture type thing, as opposed to delegation, where like, I was getting some profit, and there was a benefit.
And you never had even the conception of, hey, an agency. I mean, because it's a popular model, right? I mean, there are design agencies out there.
So I've honestly kind of fallen backwards into this, and I was always what I consider to be an agency in name only, right? And I didn't understand that this was like strategic on my part. It's just kind of something that I did accidentally, and now I recommend it to a lot of freelancers. I'm like, listen, clients will pay more if you just have a name of your company and it's not your name, because I always say that like the term freelancer often implies commodity pricing, and that you are just an interchangeable like substitute employee.
I can tackle both. I can tackle. I don't fully agree.
Okay,
just in short, my perspective
is
some clients do not want to work with agency because they think they are big, expensive, and bureaucratic, and they want to work directly with the creative person. Second of all, freelancer, we can talk about the freelancer, but a different name for that would be a consultant or something like that. If you want to, be perceived as higher level or more strategic. That's still, I mean, you can raise your prices, and it's not necessarily cheap. Being a one-person business and, the face of the company does not necessarily mean lower prices. But that's it. That was a divergent.
Fair enough. I'm sold on that. For my positioning and where my business ended up, it made most sense to be an agency in name only. You have to understand, in the market that I'm in, everything is market dependent.
Yeah.
Washington, D.C., the, going situation was that like, everyone has a business, right? And whether you're consulting, you've got a consulting business. Okay. So the next step that I did was I figured out how to design myself out of the business. And at this point, like I was doing pretty well money-wise. I'd figured out how to get clients on retainer. I had switched from the hourly billing model. So there were a lot of things that I had already implemented, but the big, blockage for all of this was just like my time. I was the bottleneck to my business because I was doing all the fulfillment myself. And I kind of just started figuring this out piece by piece. And there are kind of like 4 areas where I feel like I really implemented to get to this point now where like I'm able to work way, way, way less than I ever did. Okay. So number one, I'll rattle them off real quick. Number one, which I just talked about, was I stopped selling time for money. That was the number one thing. Was all the offers that I presented to my clients were not based on the billable hour. So retainer or project base. And the benefit for this was I was able to extricate myself from the billable hour and say, okay,
although retainer is still selling time, but it's just chopped differently. It's not, they're not looking at your hours, but
right. It's reserving time.
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
There is always, I feel like I want to do like an hour-long podcast on just like the billable hour, because I spent so much time about it. And honestly, like my hot take is that there is no ethical way to bill hourly. I think that,
I don't know. I don't bring
think about
ethics
that
into it. I just think it's like wrong incentives for everybody.
for everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. Totally. I mean, think about like your first hour of the day working versus your last hour of the day. Your energy is going to be higher at the beginning than the end, but it's still charged at the
It
same
doesn't
rate,
matter. It
or
doesn't
you can
matter.
solve a
Clients,
problem.
I
Yeah,
mean, like you shouldn't be incentivized to work longer. I mean, your clients want to get to work faster and you want to get to, I mean, you
exactly.
shouldn't be incentivized to work more. I mean, I think.
The incentives are all messed up. So anyway, stop selling time for money. Number one, change the offer, change the pricing. Number two was I started figuring out and I implemented a lot of systems in my business to start setting boundaries because I figured out one of the best ways that I could work less was to create boundaries around a lot of the ways that my business functioned without impacting the delivery and the client experience at all. A lot of these systems that I put in place were actually things that clients were happy to do. So in my business, a couple of things I'll just rattle off. Number one, I only take meetings 1 day a week. They're all clustered on Tuesdays, and that is basically the only time where clients can talk to me. There's a regular cadence for that. Number two, I don't write proposals. Number three, I don't do social media. I don't do any traditional marketing at all. I kind of did like a 80-20 analysis on my clients. And what I realized was that everything was coming from referral and word of mouth. So rather than chasing, and I see this so often, people are like, I need to post every day on social media because what if a client comes in from that? And then all their clients, if you look at all the clients are coming from referrals. So instead, I tripled down on referrals and built a system for that. And I said, we're not even going to go for social media. So I have all these no systems that I put in place, communication policies, working asynchronously, replacing a lot of meetings. And honestly, just like removing a lot of the fat from the communication process with clients has made a huge difference in just like cutting out a ton of hours from the week without affecting the results at all. Okay. So that's number two. Number three was building systems. And this was a huge unlock for me. And the two systems that I would say I probably implement most with my design agency are SOPs, so standard operating procedures, which are effectively checklists. So figuring out as I went through my business, what are the things that I do on a weekly basis that could be turned into a checklist that someone else other than me could do? And as you probably know, there are a million things like that that are not necessarily super important, like, filling out, I don't know, invoicing, right? Like just onboarding, all these small things that happen that take up a bunch of time, but aren't the meat of the project. And then the other side is templates, which I know you're familiar with, and building out templates so that we're able to get predictable results for the clients without necessarily having to worry about like starting from a blank page. I think a lot of times
that is for designs, you mean?
Yep. Yeah.
Got it.
So we have templates and systems that we built for all the kind of standard projects that we work on. So whether it's a graphic design project, website wireframes, animations, the idea is like build once, sell as many times as you can. And that doesn't affect the bespoke nature and the high ticket nature of what we do. But as you know, as a designer, like there are just some things that like, I'm going to build this the same way because it's the right way to build it every time. And so often we just start with a blank page for no reason other than we feel like we should. So that's like the two big systems that got dialed in. And it was just removing myself from the fulfillment. So in any area where I didn't need to be the person doing it, that's what I would do. And then the last one, which I know you're really interested in.
Yeah, exactly. So go ahead.
Is delegation.
Sorry for cutting you off.
The last one is, no, you're cool. You're cool. The last one is delegation. And this was probably the last piece of the puzzle that I implemented. And this was the biggest unlock in my business. And I've learned a ton about how to delegate effectively. And I hear over and over again from people all the different ways about why delegation sucks. Number one thing that I hear is that there's no one good out there, that it's impossible to find someone. And everyone who tells me that, they have talked to maximum 1 to 2 people. And the big secret to delegation that no one wants to hear is that you need to talk to a ton of people. Okay. Like I've probably done interviews and sent out kind of like cold requests for over 100 people to talk to for delegating out every single role in my business: design, development, animation, you know what I mean? Copywriting, strategy, marketing, all of these different roles. And I've had interviews with a ton of them. And the bottom line is like delegating correctly is like finding, the gold nugget on the beach with, with the metal detector. It is not something where you can just say the first person that I found is the one. But when you have that roster, and right now I have a team of probably like, I say team loosely, of like, I don't know, maybe 10 to 12 freelancers that are like my vetted go-to people who've been working with me for years now. And they're like the backbone of the business. You know what I mean? They get paid exactly what they want, whatever their rates are. And I can totally trust them to fulfill on the project. And I think that's really the big missing piece, after setting the boundaries, building the systems, is just bringing in people who are skilled in order to take over the fulfillment so that I can focus on where I provide the most value to clients. And for me, what I do now, people ask, all right, Rich, like you work 15 hours a week running this agency. What stuff do you do? 3 things that I do are I do high level strategy, I do high level design, so just the very tip of the iceberg, and then I do sales and client management. So the 3 areas where I feel like I provide the most value to clients are in those places. And then everything else I've kind of delegated out over time.
Very interesting. So I had
Bring it on.
three topics to discuss based on that. But the first one you you just tackled on it last, which is, I was going to say, you've mentioned how important relationship was and how, the clients are coming from referrals. And I was going to say, well, so if they're coming for a relationship, then they want to work with you. And that's going to be a difficult thing to replace. But what I'm hearing from you is, so I haven't replaced sales and even strategy and stuff like that. So I don't know if you do all client communication or frontal client communication. And that's okay if you only stack it on a Tuesday. So you say, okay, I've got like clients Tuesday, and that's okay.
Yep.
So that was the first thing to ask, but okay. So you've mentioned it. So my other question is, and again, I'm asking as somebody who started to go that route. And again, now I'm also managing a team and I'm going down that route again. One thing that I struggle with, or that comes to my mind, is, I personally got into design because I actually really like doing it and I enjoy doing it. And now I'm in the business of, again, delegation and working with people and managing, making sure they're accountable and they're delivering on good work and stuff like that. And I personally find that way less fun than actually doing design work or creative work. And to me, it's just like, oh my God, now I have to talk to people again and have all like these people issues again. So like, how do you think about that? Because you're right, that's getting you leverage, but then also that, I don't know that it's fun, but at least to me, maybe people are different.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think one of the missing pieces, and I know like you're building a team with, I imagine you, I don't know, what percentage of your team are full-time employees?
It's
are you
not a lot. A
mostly
lot of
full-time, or
contractors.
mostly
We've got
contractors, but they're kind
2
of
full-time,
aligned a
but
little
a
bit
lot
more.
of, I think it's similar to you. We've got actually 3 full-time people and then about 10 to 20 collaborators, contractors that, doing part-time with us.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's really easy to fall into the trap of like, you just wake up and you're like, wait, did I just build myself like a manager position?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
why did I get in business? And I think one of the things that I've always focused on strategically is just like knowing when to say this is enough. And I'm kind of at this point now with my business where I feel like I'm at the perfect sweet spot of profit and time. And honestly, if you ask me, like, this is something people don't necessarily understand or can't intuit. If you were like, Rich, what's your plan to double your revenue, next year to make your business bigger, which most people are thinking about, I would say that is not on the table. The goal is to sustain this business at this size, because to take this business model and double it is going to require input of my time, right?
Yeah.
I can manage 500K at 15 hours a week, running my team, taking care of the clients, delivering really incredible results. And you have to know, like, I work with 6, 7 clients a year. So one of the reasons that I'm able to not spend so much time in meeting hell and in delegation hell is because I'm really aligned on just like, these are the perfect type of clients that I want to work with. And anything outside of that is an automatic no for me.
This
So I
is
leave a ton of money on the table.
this is a super, for me personally, where I am right now, this is a super insightful realization of this is the size of the business and it's not going to scale. I don't know how if that's naturally occurred to you. I personally, and just because I had a track record of for so many years growing and growing kind of like rapidly, that when I got to this, I guess you can call it plateau of size, I immediately felt like a loser or trying to not, well, I either for not keeping on the growth or, yeah, again, trying to throw more time or money at the problem beyond where it makes me happy. So I'm dealing with this at the moment, actually, and I wonder how did you became okay with it, or you were it was never an issue. I'm like, oh, okay, so I'm not going to make 5 million with the agency. That's fine.
Yeah, that was never my goal. I think I do have the benefit of like, I'm not necessarily intrinsically motivated to get bigger and bigger for the sake of growing. Like one of the things I talk about, I have this course that I teach, and it's basically teaching people how to implement all these principles that I talked about. And there's this idea of there's 2 types of entrepreneurs. There's achievement entrepreneurs and there's lifestyle entrepreneurs. And I really believe that it's a spectrum in between, where an achievement entrepreneur is building for the sake of growing the big thing and for the achievement. And, when I talk about in the course, as they get more productive, they take those productivity gains and they invest it back into the business. So if they can figure out how to remove 5 hours from their day in meetings, they're going to spend that 5 hours, on strategy or doing something else.
I feel like,
whereas the other
I feel
side
like
of the
I already
coin
understand the
is,
question, the answer. Yeah.
The lifestyle person is going to remove 5 hours from their day and not work more, right?
Yeah,
They're going to go and, pick up a hobby or hang out. And listen, it's a spectrum. For a while, when I taught it, I was like, okay, there's either one or the other. And what I've realized is everyone falls on a different place. We all have that sweet spot of like achievement versus lifestyle. And it's really on us to sit down and think about like, what is the business that I want? What size do I want? There's no shame. I mean, listen, dude, you're like, what you did 2 million last year in revenue. Like you're doing well. Most people would look at your business and say, holy crap, I could never imagine getting to that point. So you're already a winner. You're already an outlier compared to most. But the voice that we have in our heads, and I see it too, I don't know if you spend too much time on Twitter, but there is always a bigger business out there. And it's really easy to just like pull it up also, and be like, oh, I'm nothing.
It's really also important. I'm based in Tel Aviv, Israel. It's really ecosystem of VC-backed startups, which are all, I would say, fall into the achievement entrepreneurs. And they actually, like the language is actually kind of like saying a lifestyle business is kind of like derogatory. It's like, oh, so you're just a lifetime business. Okay, nice, cute. Have fun playing with that. While we, the big boys, go do something important with our lives, right? So I think I felt into that trap. And now I'm trying to kind of like move myself into the spectrum of just being okay with having like a really long lunch break and but yeah,
it doesn't, you make it sound so bad, like it.
No, it's just something that I'm working through at the moment.
No, totally. I think this is a perfect time to have this conversation because you're in this place where like, so when I was doing prep for this, I watched your year in review video where you basically talked about how you implemented all this stuff into your business, thinking like, okay, if I just invest all this into my business, the obvious result is revenue is going to increase, right? And you did it. Stuff was happening. Some of the bets didn't work out. Some of it was out of your control. And you basically stayed exactly the same, right? And as a result, you spent all this money and there was nothing to show for it. Listen, I've done that too in my business. The only difference between me and you is that I bet a much smaller percentage on those kind of bets. So rather than going all in and taking the achievement route where you're like, let's reinvest it all back in the hopes of doubling revenue or whatever your goal was. I will take these bets often and will say, listen, I'm willing to lose 20 grand here to see what happens. And that the only real difference is just the scope at which I'm willing to do it. So it's not like you have to stop making these bets, but you don't have to go all in on like, it's this or bust. So you're kind of treating your business like a startup, right? Like you talked about in your video, where you're like, all right, the next step is scale to what, 8 figures is probably what you had in the back of your head. But you've got a beautiful business. And listen, this business that you have now, if you could run it for the next 10 years, you will be more successful than 99.9% of people, because staying in business is an achievement that no one talks about.
Yeah, for sure.
And people forget that, like it's
so
really easy to be like,
so let's talk about, so let's talk about this. So now you have figured out an amazing thing, right? Doing 500K with an agency, doing 15 hours. Fantastic. Sounds phenomenal. And now you start content business, courses, pumping out content, newsletter, post on Instagram, Twitter, which is a lot of work. So this is like, again, so you're not working less. You are also taking your time and investing it somewhere else, which I'm 100%. Interested to hear about.
Yeah. I'm glad you asked about this. So honestly, when I talk about 15 hours a week on my agency, these days it's even less. I track my time. Let's see if I can pull this up without slowing us down too much. But let's say last week.
Are you using Toggle? Toggle or
how'd you know?
Because I opened up your last newsletter and saw it was sponsored by Toggle. And I was like, I used to use Toggle myself.
It is. Nice. Toggle's awesome. I really keep it super frictionless. But yeah, I mean, I would say probably 5. I'm looking at this week, 3 hours and 58 minutes on my agency. It's even, I've just been doing this for so long and it's so dialed in. And, my freelancer's been working with work for my clients for a long time. It is a well-oiled machine. And what I think I just want to say real quick before we talk about my other business, which I love talking about, is this is all about results. And I think what people pay me for now is they pay me for strategy, high-level thinking, and then the design is almost like the party favors. You know what I mean? It's just the implementation on top of it. Yep. So I'm able to provide, because I've been in the business for a while, like, I can have a conversation with a client that is super valuable to them and, potentially makes them a bunch of money just by, giving my insights or my thoughts or whatever. And then the next end step is like, okay, now my team's going to execute on what needs to happen to get that thing, out the door. So for me, where I provide the most value, it is strategy and thinking. And then my team and the system that I built, because I really do feel like it's a business system that I've built.
But systems break all the time. People leave, people can't show up. You need to find a replacement. This guy, like, shit happens and then you have to deal with it, right? It's not like on a week where the system works well, fantastic. But on a week that the system breaks, it's a shit show.
Yeah. I mean, I've had it break over and over again. But what I've gotten better at is figuring out the places where it breaks and preempting them. So there are just all kinds of little tiny tweaks that I've made that help mitigate the risk around places where it will break. So I'll give you an example is delegation, for instance, right? This is such a simple one, but this is just how I think about it. When I give a deadline to someone on my team, freelancer, someone working on the project, the deadline that they get is 2 days before the deadline that the client gets. Yeah, right. Sure. And that's just a simple system where if they miss a deadline, they get sick, they do the work and it's messed up and they didn't do it right the first time, there is lead time in there. So I'm not like, sometimes we're our own worst enemy and we'll just promise like, it'll be due that day. And that's the freelancer's deadline. And that's my deadline. And that's the client's deadline. And then that's how you end up pulling out your hair. So it's just all kinds of little mini risk mitigation things that have been put in over time. But anyway, let's talk about why I've got another business when this business just does its thing. So it kind of happened by accident. I really never intended to do this. I have been someone historically who's been pretty not interested in social media in that entire world. like I mentioned, my agency doesn't have a social media page. I was not someone who was posting on social media, even just for like recreation. Um, I would like, lurk on Twitter and, follow things that I was interested in, but they didn't have anything to do with business or anything like that. Like I'd be more likely to look at social media for like some hobby that I'm interested in, like, video games or like sports or whatever. But this is so funny because the impetus for this really goes back to you, and you would have no idea about this. So I hired like 3 years ago, Chris Do, to be my coach. And I did a bunch of one-on-one coaching sessions with him, which I feel like I made a really smart decision because I paid him for 8 hours of coaching at his old rate, which was, I think, $1,000 an hour. So I spent $8,000 on 8 coaching sessions with him. He charges $5,000 an hour now. So I feel like I really got arbitrage on Chris's time.
What were the goal? Was the goal increasing, like growing the agency, or like what were you trying to solve?
It was all agency. This, the social media business, all that stuff didn't exist at all.
Yeah.
And really it was just talking with him about like best practices around sales, delegation, and just his experience with an agency. And I kind of took what I could from him and then plug it into my thing where like, my biggest thing was like, I don't want to grow for the sake of growing.
Yeah.
I just want like a lean, profitable business. So anyway, I talked to Chris. The reason that I found Chris in the first place that I hired him was I watched the mock coaching session that you and him did on your YouTube channel.
And dude, so many people saw that video. So many people referred to that video.
Dude, it was crazy. So I just Googled Chris Do coaching because I was like, I've never spent $1,000 on an hour of someone's time before. I paid for like, $200 an hour every now and then just to like pick someone's brain. But 1,000 was a lot. So I was like, all right, let me watch this video. And that was like that was basically the sales call inadvertently that got me to work with Chris.
So I wonder if this video made more money to me or to him. But I guess both of us made money off that video.
Yeah, but honestly, it was super, super helpful. And I just got a sense for like, all right, how does this work? Like what's Chris like one-on-one, etc. And that's been amazing. So we worked together probably, I don't know, every like 2 or 3 months for the last couple of years. And things have really evolved. And one of the things that happened was like, I got to the point where I implemented all this stuff. I felt like we were at like a logical place in terms of like, my agency is more or less where it was now. I've been at this 500K number for a couple of years and I was feeling good. And I was like, all right, well, what's next? And we were talking about it and he was like, you should consider talking about what you do online, because your business is really different than everyone that I talked to. Most people are not really running design businesses like this. So I kind of just was like, all right, sure, whatever, I can take a suggestion. And when I posted for the first time on Instagram, which is I'm coming up on the 2-year anniversary, I had no intention of anything coming from it, right? There was no strategy for like, the goal was just like post every day is basically what Chris told me and see what happens. And I ended up blowing up relatively quickly. Within like 90 days, I had maybe like 10,000 followers, which I didn't really understand at the time is unusual. And from there, it kind of just happened organically where I just started asking myself like, okay, what do people like hearing me talk about? What do people want to know? And then eventually I kind of took all of my learnings and everything that I've kind of put into place and productized it and turned it into this course. And it was all really organic. There was no plan to do this. It was really just based on like the questions that I got in the DMs, what people wanted to know and what people liked hearing me talk about. And now I just love this business. Like I love teaching people. I love, doing the live sessions and everything. And I'm kind of in a similar situation to you where it's like, all right.
It sounds very similar. Like I stumbled into this business as well. I mean, I stumbled it as well. And there's even like on that specific call with Chris Do where he's saying, maybe YouTube can be your business. I'm like, no, I don't care about that. I don't want to teach people. But yeah.
But what's interesting, and the one thing that I'll say is people are like, okay, well, wait, why did you start a second business? Like, don't you just want to like sit on the beach and do nothing with all of your free time? And I still have that itch that everyone has to like create and do new things and help people. And really the biggest reason is like I've spent my entire career using all of these skills that I've gained to make my clients rich. I mean, listen, I got paid for it, but like I was always building someone else's business. And there is just something that is really, really satisfying about taking like what feels like the culmination of the last 10 years of experience and design work and strategy and marketing and all these things that I've learned and being able to just apply it 100% to your own thing. Like it's really cool. I'm sure you've been
Indeed.
there as
I
well.
I I agree 100%. I agree 100%. Dude, Rich, it was so fun talking to you. It was like
Yeah,
really a
man.
great conversation, and I think it's going to be valuable for a lot of people. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, man. 100%.
All right. So let's wrap it up. And
Yeah.
thank you so much, man.